Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We're now going to be looking ahead with those Final Four teams that are remaining in the NBA playoffs. I want to talk about what the best types of matchups we could see in the finals could be and what the top storylines would be coming out of those. So, it's obviously been talked about plenty up to this point that the youth movement is one of the biggest remaining stories in the postseason. CBS put out a stat yesterday that said this is just the second time in NBA history that each of the Final Four remaining teams in the playoffs has an all-star in their age 25 season or younger. Important to note that Tatum did just turn 26, but this is still technically his age 25 season. So all of this bakes into the conversation that has been an overarching storyline on the season, which is who is going to be the face of the league moving forward. And I think that the top two names that have been talked about in this light are Anthony Edwards and Jayson Tatum, like I just talked about in the player ranking segment. I think they are neck and neck. Now, Tatum has a couple years on Anthony Edwards, and Edwards is no doubt a more flashy player. He's extremely marketable as well, so I would say that he is probably the favorite in that conversation, but Tatum is also an incredible talent in his own right. He's extremely composed. He is a role model. Of course, him and Deuce going everywhere together. So I think that they are both awesome candidates for this conversation. And I also believe that the Timberwolves and the Celtics are the best two teams in the NBA. Nuggets could be a conversation. I still feel like the Nuggets would beat the Celtics if the two teams were to face off against one another in the postseason. But at least if we're talking remaining teams, I think that it's the Timberwolves and the Celtics, and I don't really have all that much doubt. Now, the Mavericks, that series is still going to be interesting, so by no means do I want to discount the Mavericks. I think the Timberwolves on paper are the better roster, but like I talked about in my show yesterday, there are certain play style things that could absolutely come into play, and the Mavericks could be a difficult matchup for the Timberwolves. But again, ultimately, I think that Edwards versus Tatum for that front runner spot in terms of being the future face of the league, having that finals MVP under their belt would be the number one storyline I think that could come out of this. The Timberwolves aren't necessarily from this big market, but still it seems like everybody has gravitated towards Anthony Edwards, and I think that that level of stardom himself, kind of shows that what level of a face of the league he could be, that tons of people now care about the Minnesota Timberwolves, although I think that from a casual standpoint, ESPN and these national companies probably didn't do the Timberwolves all that much justice during the regular season in terms of promoting them, but they are now officially arrived and everybody is aware of them. So I think that that would be a fascinating matchup. Again, the storyline of Edwards versus Tatum for the face of the league. Now, in this whole face of the league conversation, I also think that a Luka Doncic finals MVP could make things very, very interesting, because I do think that there is absolutely a nationality component to this conversation, where just from a, pure marketing standpoint of a league that is based out of America, I think that the NBA would probably prefer having an American player be the one who is dominating the league, is extremely marketable and such. But Luka Doncic has a chance to sort of show that the NBA isn't necessarily an American league anymore, where we are in this sort of era of the fact that Giannis and Jokic have won 2 of the last 3 finals MVPs. Luka could enter himself in this conversation to make it 3 of 4, and the fact that we haven't seen an American-born MVP since 2018, this could be the beginning of the national overseas era in the NBA. And I am absolutely fascinated by the expansion of the NBA across borders. I'm all for it. I want to see the Olympics get this extra juice to it and such, but I think that, Luka is somebody who could probably take that over from an international standpoint. Jokic absolutely probably already would have up to this point if that was something that he really cared about. Giannis is also still in that conversation, both of those players in their late 20s, but Luka just turned 25 years old. I expect him to, be a prominent force in the NBA for at least another decade, as long as, knock on wood, everything works out for him. But Luka could be, sort of the bright up-and-coming face of this international era. And again, Jokic has already won 3 MVPs and a national championship. We've seen Giannis with his accolades as well. But again, I think that Luka is probably the one that could take it over as LeBron James and his era of greats come out of the league, that it is Luka rising up at that same time and can sort of take the throne in that sense. And again, I said that this is sort of could be the beginning of this national era, because we just saw Victor Wembanyama get drafted first overall this past year. He is already making arguments that he is a top 10 player in the league. Now, I don't want to necessarily dive into all of that right now, but Wemby is going to be a prominent force moving forward. Should be a perennial all-star from here on out, probably all-NBA as well. Kevin O'Connor, I listened to the Bill Simmons podcast this morning, and he said that he expects Victor Wembanyama to be the best player in the league by midway through next season. Now, I think that that's getting out ahead of ourselves maybe a little bit, but Wemby, there's no doubt the talent is there, and I think that, he, along with, I know that there's not necessarily viewed as that superstar talent in the upcoming draft, but there are likely going to be 3 lottery picks this year that are going to be foreign-born players in Alex Sarr, Zachary Risachet, and Nikola Topic. So, going to be really interesting to see how that all plays out as well, at least in terms of the face of the league conversation. I also feel like, sticking with the Dallas Mavericks, there's a chance we could get a Kyrie Irving versus Boston series, which would definitely, again, I've talked about this before, I am a Celtics fan, but I fully understand that the Celtics fan base is one of the most toxic fan bases in the NBA, and you can make an argument for sports in general as well. A lot of bad blood here between Kyrie and Boston. Now, I think that a lot of maybe more rational Celtics fans have probably gotten to a point where it's just really fun to see him play basketball, and I've really appreciated watching him through this postseason run doing what he does. That being said, he's going to be talking some smack to Celtics fans if that were to become a series, and at least for the time being, if that were to take place, I would probably, go back to my roots a little bit of how ugly of an ending it was with him in Boston, but I think that would be, incredibly fun to watch. I think the Mavericks would have a very good chance in that series as well. So that would be a really fun one for me. Keep talking about the Celtics here because they are the team with all the pressure in the world really on their shoulders, more so than any of these other teams, where it seems like out of the, final 4 teams that remain, it's almost being chalked up as a success already for the Pacers, Timberwolves, and Mavericks, where the Celtics, this is kind of where their season begins. Like, the fact that they won 64 games during the regular season doesn't mean anything. Conference finals is pretty much, and not even necessarily in an arrogant way from a Celtics fan perspective, but everybody talks about it, that the expectation for the Celtics is winning a championship, and they haven't done so since 2008, and it seems like they do keep coming up short in these instances, and now it's up to them with the amount of talent that they have on their roster to actually bring it home. So that is obviously a massive storyline as well. If they aren't able to win the championship, there are going to be a variety of different storylines coming out of it. The idea of who or what is it that's holding them back. I think worst case for the Celtics, honestly, to some degree, is Kristaps Porzingis not being healthy and having that as a little bit of a baked-in excuse, which I do think it would be a very big deal. And I do feel like if Kristaps Porzingis is healthy, they can beat, and not just that they can, they should beat anybody remaining in the playoffs. But if that isn't the case, there is, or, if Porzingis isn't healthy, there's a real chance that they could be a little bit stagnant and hesitant to make any types of moves. But, going to be interesting to see how this plays out for the Celtics. And then the last sort of note I wanted to make here is Minnesota. At least social media is the worst the majority of the time, but definitely good inspiration if you're talking about different storylines that could come out. The Jimmy Butler factor of this, where Jimmy Butler sort of came into Minnesota for one season, brought them to the playoffs, ended their postseason drought, and on his way out was basically like, these guys are losers, they can't win. And if Karl Anthony Towns were to win a finals along with Andrew Wiggins, who won one in 2022, and have Butler without one, obviously not the same scenarios. We're just talking storylines here. I don't think it would be fair to hold that against Jimmy, but it would be a reality. And, if Minnesota is to win the finals, it's more than likely, I would say probably, 85% sure Anthony Edwards would be the finals MVP. But there's also a world where Karl Anthony Towns could win it. That would be maybe, it would be a huge accomplishment for a very talented player. I think there would be a comedic aspect to it, though, where Cat has been sort of talked down on so much among NBA fans, and for him to go out and win a finals MVP would, I think, would be very funny and would absolutely make for some interesting conversations over the off season about who are the rankings of the different bigs in the NBA. But let me know what you want to see in the NBA Finals, what your ideal matchup would be. I know that for a lot of people it is, if either Luka or Ant wins Finals MVP, they're going to be okay with that. But again, give us your thoughts in the comments section. But we're going to be taking our next break here, and when we come back on the other side, we're going to be diving into the all-rookie and all-defensive teams that were just announced within the past couple days. So stick with us, and we will be right back after this quick break.